Okay, we're going to talk about safety regulation, and the basic idea behind this lecture is uh, you can have too much safety. There's trade-offs involved in the pursuit of any economic goal. There are lots of economic goods. They all use resources to obtain them, and anytime you go after one of them, you're going to be giving up something else. So in the pursuit of safety, like any other economic good, you must compare benefits with costs. So there are three ways that I want you to remember how regulation of one type of risk can introduce other types of risks. The first way is that regulations are one size fits all. And whenever you have a one size fits all policy, that means it's not going to fit certain people. Secondly, minimizing possible harms at the same time minimizes the possible benefits from that activity. And then finally, the cost of eliminating specific risks can increase something called generalized risk. So you might want to pause the video at this point, write these principles down. I'm going to be talking about them for the rest of the presentation, but you definitely want these three things in your notes. They are basically the summary of this lecture. Okay. So, starting with the idea that there's no one size fits all when it comes to safety. There's a trade-off. Here we see in the photo a man, obviously fit, with a walkout tub. Now, this is an expensive option for your bathroom. You may want to spend money on this, but this guy doesn't look like he's struggling with balance. He looks pretty sturdy and he may slip and fall, but if he does, he'll probably be okay. If an older person with very poor balance, or maybe somebody who's disabled, uh, they might struggle to get in and out of the tub. This is the kind of thing that they would probably be better off spending money on. When it comes to safety, there is a principle that everyone should follow as an individual. We can't follow this as a society because we're too different. But for each one of us as a person, we have to pursue safety up to the point where the marginal benefits of that safety to us equals the marginal cost of that safety to us as individuals. The reason that these things will vary from person to person is because we all have different values, we have different opinions, different attitudes, and because we all face different circumstances. So here's an example of how we face different circumstances. Um, here's an airbag. It's designed to save the life of a 175-pound male passenger without a seatbelt who crashes into a stationary object at 35 miles an hour. Now that's a powerful airbag. And it's great if you're a 175-pound unbelted male. But if you're this lady, not so great. An airbag that powerful would likely do her a lot more harm than good. It could kill her. Here's another example. Different attitudes about risk. So, for example, the Army recently had a reenlistment incentive of $40,000, I believe, for demolition experts to sign up for defusing bombs. It's a very dangerous job, but $40,000 is $40,000. Some people are willing to take that risk. Some people just value money that much. Point is, the right decision is going to be different from one person to another. And if the outcome is that you actually do die from accepting a risk, doesn't mean it was a bad choice. It's a gamble. And some gambles are good decisions even if they don't pay off. So, for example, when Pat Tillman, who was a famous NFL player, gave up millions of dollars in order to join the Army, it was to fulfill a lifelong dream of his to be an Army Ranger. He did that. Unfortunately, he died in Afghanistan. Does that mean it was a bad decision? His family says no. His family, his wife, They say, look, he was doing what he loved. For him, it was the right thing to do. Um, he knew it was possible, but he did it anyway. So, another example of our individuality. The FDA can only approve drugs that are safe and effective. But what is safe? If there's a drug treatment for multiple sclerosis that might kill 1 in 500 people, would you take it if you had multiple sclerosis? I wouldn't. To me, 1 in 500 is too big a risk. But when this question was asked of actual MS patients, a significant number, 8%, it's not a lot, but it's not nothing. 8% said they would definitely take it. 24% said they probably would. 34% said they probably wouldn't, and 19% said they definitely wouldn't. Does this mean that one of these groups made the right choice and the others made the wrong choice? Or is it more likely that they just had different attitudes about the kinds of risks they're willing to take to get relief from their symptoms? So here's the bottom line, and you should write this down. If consumers are fully informed and rational, a one-size-fits-all regulation will make somebody worse off, but nobody better off. In other words, regulations do more harm than good. Students often get this question wrong on a test, so make sure that you remember this. Write it down. Here's one way to visualize or to argue in favor of the principle we just said. Consider two individuals with different attitudes about risk. For example, two soldiers thinking about what job they are willing to accept. The demolitions expert, I already pointed out, very dangerous, but pays more money. We talked about maybe $40,000. So if we measure money on this axis and safety on this axis, obviously the person who chooses point A is going to have more money but a little less safety than the person who wants to be at point B. Point B is willing to accept less money in exchange for more safety. And there's no reason why we'd expect people to have the same preferences. But notice what happens when we put a safety standard, a one-size-fits-all regulation, on this diagram. Here we have a minimum safety standard, which means that options to the left of point B are not legal, right? They're off the table. That means nobody can choose point A even if they want to. The safety standard moves everybody's choices to the smaller portion of the trade-off curve, and that doesn't hurt people who prefer point B, but it sure hurts people who prefer point A, even if it saves their lives. Remember the Pat Tillman example. Preventing him from joining the army would have saved his life, but it would have deprived him of his preferred choice. Now, what this means is that, oh, sorry, I need to go back to well, here, I'll just tell you. What this means is if people are rational and fully informed, so they know what the trade-offs are, then regulation prevents them from, making their own choice. The only real case for regulation is when people are not fully informed, or perhaps when they're irrational. For example, when it comes to drug addicts, we could say that once you've become addicted to a drug, your ability to make a rational choice may be compromised, right? Your body may have such a terrible craving that your mind can't resist it. Another example would be maybe you're taking a medicine, you don't know what's in that medicine, you don't know enough about the chemistry to know what the side effects are. So that's another case where regulation might make people better off who otherwise wouldn't be fully informed. But even if regulations do make us better off, as in the case of, medicines, that doesn't necessarily mean they will make us better off. So if the government wants to make us better off, they should try and evaluate the trade-offs and pick the level of regulation that's going to produce the most beneficial outcome. Unfortunately, they don't necessarily have an incentive to do that. So let's imagine the case of drug approval. When it comes to drug approval, there are a couple of mistakes that regulators could make. They could allow a harmful product to be sold, let's call that type 1 error, and they could prevent or disapprove a helpful product. So that would be type 2 error. Here you see it in a matrix form. Two possibilities for the drug. It's either beneficial or harmful. Two possibilities for the regulators. They either allow it or they don't. That produces four possible outcomes, two of which are pretty good, right? If they allow a beneficial drug, that's great. Or if they prohibit a harmful drug, that's cool. But what if they allow a harmful drug? That's the type 1 error. Or what if they disallow a helpful drug? That's type 2 error. And the point here is that both type 1 and type 2 error are bad for our health. They produce worse health outcomes than if they made the correct decision. But everybody makes mistakes. So, sorry, I got to go back to the previous slide if I can. Well, I can't. Everybody makes mistakes. So basically, the regulators have to decide which type of error they are most concerned with. And the problem is that if they approve a harmful drug, right? This is type 1 error that we talked about. If they approve a harmful drug, that usually makes the news. It gets a lot of attention. That is a visible error. That is, it's visible to the public. It brings disgrace. It costs people their jobs, right? It's a problem. However, the delay of a beneficial drug is something that, well, it's in a way it's invisible because nobody really is aware that a beneficial drug exists because obviously it hasn't been approved yet. So this is a mistake. It's type 2 error, but it generates no public outcry, no scrutiny, nobody loses their job. Therefore, the incentive of the regulators is to prevent type 1 error at all costs. And this is, in fact, what actually happens. Here's a former director of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, talking about this. If you want to, you can pause the slide and read the quote. Basically, he's saying they get in serious trouble and they're constantly called in by Congress to explain their decisions when a potentially risky drug is actually approved. They've never been questioned when they decided not to approve a beneficial drug. So here's an example of that type 2 error. This is a fairly simple device. You wouldn't think that it would have to be approved by the FDA, but it is. All medical devices have to be approved by the FDA. And you wouldn't think that it's particularly dangerous. All it is a piece, a couple of things of silicone with some gel in between. It improves the sensitivity of the finger so that when women are doing a self-exam, it allows them to detect much smaller tumors than they could without it. So this allows earlier detection. And, it's great. But FDA decided to take their time. The device was, invented in 1984. Took a while to apply for the permits to market it. 1985, that permit application was denied by the FDA. Now, why did they deny it? They thought that women might not know how to use it properly, or they might avoid seeing their doctor because they figure the pad is good enough. In any case, they decided it's not worth the risk, so they denied it. So the inventor took another route. He said, well, I won't sell it to people. I'll sell it to hospitals. And nurses can use it. And, they can give it to their patients to take home with them after they've already had a diagnosis. And that was actually working, and there are documented cases where it did allow earlier detection. But when the FDA found out this was happening, they put a stop to it in 1988 or 1989. So in 1989, the inventor applied for the permit again. All this takes time and money. It was again denied. Finally, in 1995, they applied for a permit for the device to be marketed with prescription only. Now, this would still limit access. A lot of women would not bother to see their doctor in order to get permission to buy this, but even so, many women would. So it's a victory. 1995, you can get it with a prescription. Finally, in 1999, it was approved for over-the-counter use. This is 15 years later. How many women died of breast cancer because their tumors were detected too late in the process for them to survive? We don't know. That's the invisibility of this. There's definitely some negative outcomes here, but we'll never know exactly how bad they were or who it applied to. Here's another example of uh, over-regulation, overzealous regulation. Now, this is infant formula, which probably should be regulated. People should have some idea that it's safe, and they don't always know what's in it. Although I should point out that manufacturers have a strong incentive for the sake of their reputation, right? Especially if they're a large company. They have a strong incentive to make their products safe. The other thing we have to consider is that if they don't, there are lawsuits, and these lawsuits can be extremely punitive. So there are incentives in place, but let's suppose that as an extra layer of accountability, the government's going to regulate this product. Well, they did, but the regulations they imposed were so strict that it actually made a bad situation worse. In 2023, the government closed down one of the few infant formula factories in the United States. They were concerned about contamination, so they shut it down. As a result, a shortage of baby formula emerged, and many people could not find baby formula anywhere. So what are you going to feed your baby? A lot of women started feeding them regular cow's milk. Other women were watering down their formula, trying to stretch it out a little further because, look, when your baby's hungry, crying, what are you going to do? So they're getting watered down formula, they're getting cow's milk. All this time, a perfectly safe infant formula could have been imported from Europe, except our regulations did not allow that. Why? Because European formula had not been approved by the FDA. What was wrong with it? Well, it seems like the most significant thing wrong with it was the label. It didn't include a label listing all the ingredients. And so, it was brought into the United States, but it was seized at our ports. So it could not actually be sold in our stores at a time when women were desperate to find infant formula from any source. So you'll read about this in one of your readings this week. It's an example of, maybe we're trying so hard to make products safe that we're actually making a bad situation worse. Again, these are the unintended consequences of overzealous regulation. Of course, the classic example of unintended consequences is from Prohibition, when deaths from alcohol poisoning shot up. This was a period when you could not legally sell alcoholic beverages. Now, there were some good effects of this. People did drink less. The rates of cirrhosis of the liver, which is caused by, too much drinking, those cases went down. But the cases of death from alcohol poisoning skyrocketed. It's because the government was actually allowing alcohol products like wood alcohol and other industrial type alcohols to be sold. But to make sure that people wouldn't try to consume them in order to get around prohibition, they actually required companies to put poison into wood alcohol. And the label said, do not drink this. It is poison. But guess what? People were so desperate for a drink, they drank it anyway. This was a period of time when a government regulation literally poisoned people that otherwise would have been fine by the tens of thousands. So the third principle that we talked about was something called generalized risk. So you see here a picture of a tire that's nearly bald. This is the kind of risk that a poor person will take. They're strapped for cash. They know they need to replace the tire. They know the tire is an important safety feature on their car. They just can't afford it right now. So safety is something that we as individuals can spend our own money on, and the more money we have, the more safety we'll buy. But if the government is forcing us to pay for the kinds of safety they think we should have, then that gives us less money that we can spend ourselves on the safety that we would prefer to have. I know that sounds strange, but basically, we spend a lot of money on regulation. It's a mistake to think that businesses pay for regulations. Um, they build it into the prices of the goods and services they sell. So the average U.S. household spends about 25% of its income on regulations. That's a lot of money. It should be generating a lot of safety. Unfortunately, it's not really very effective. The government is not actually trying to make sure that money is spent on the things that will save the most lives. Instead, it's kind of a patchwork thing. Oh, let's try and eliminate this risk. Let's try and eliminate that risk. No matter how much it costs. When we study the actual regulations that are used in our economy, we find that many of them are reducing people's income enough so that it's crowding out private spending on safety. It's actually making consumers less safe overall. It's eliminating some of the risks that the government thinks are important while increasing the amount of risks that we're exposed to in our normal patterns of consumption. Here's a study by Robert Hahn and his co-authors. They studied 24 regulations. Of these, they found that 13 probably reduced safety overall. That is, they introduced generalized risk far in excess of any specific risk that they prohibited. There were some, 4 of them, actually did produce significant gains in safety, and another 7 of them were small gains in safety. So this generalized risk is something that regulators fail to take into account when they're deciding what to regulate or how strict to regulate it. Again, I'm not saying that regulation can't make people better off, but it's more likely to make people better off if 2 things happen. Number one, it's only applied in cases where people are either uninformed or irrational. Okay? You might want to write that down. If regulation is going to make people better off, then there are 2 things you got to consider. Number one, it should only be applied when people are uninformed or irrational. The second thing is the government regulation must try to pass this benefit cost test. It must seek to balance the risks they're trying to prevent with the potential benefits, right? That marginal cost, marginal benefit principle that we talked about earlier, as much as possible, regulators should be concerned about that. Whether it's comparing type 1 error and type 2 error in the process of drug approval, or whether it's comparing generalized risk versus some specific risk they're trying to address. The government should focus on economic efficiency when deciding on the kinds of rules that might make people better off. Okay? So, number one, uninformed, irrational. Number two, economically efficient. And that will be it for this week. Thanks for your attention.